Dave and Don, it was their band, the In-Betweens, and Johnny Hells was the singer. In fact, he was a great singer. He got a voice sort of a bit R&B, James Brown, Sam Cooke, a cross between the two. He was a great singer, but he was an idle git. He wouldn't work. You know, he wouldn't turn up for shows. He didn't turn up for rehearsals and stuff. And Dave and Don wrote me and Jim into the band because the band was splitting anyway. And they got me in, and they knew I could sing, but they never thought that I'd be able to carry a whole show. I did, but they didn't. Funnily enough, we started to look for another singer. I was going to do half the show, and we were going to look for another lead singer as well, because mainly at the time I was playing double lead guitar with Dave, you know, as well as singing part of the show. It was actually our tour manager, Graham Swinnerton, his name is, who said, well, I think Noddy's well good enough to carry a whole show, you know, and the others, when you're inside a band, you see, you don't see it from the outside as much, you know, you sort of go along with the thing, and because we were used to having two lead vocalists, that's what we thought we needed. And so we gave it a shot, and we went out and did our very first show as a four-piece, and we tore the place apart. Offered a record deal by Fontana Records. We'd had no real experience in the music business from the recording point of view, and Fontana Records put us into a studio for a week and said, make an album. And basically we had to record, they wanted us to record our stage show as was at the time, which is what we did. We went in and recorded our stage show. At the time we were SLADE, and the album did come out. It was called Beginnings. And while we were recording that album, the head of Fontana Records, a guy called Jack Baverstock, he said, you need a London agent to get your gigs around London. So this London agent came along, Johnny Gunnell his name was, and he brought Chas Chandler with him. He just sort of was finishing with Jimi Hendrix at the time. Jimi Hendrix had moved back to America, and he was looking for a British act to manage. He wanted a band this time, not just one artist, like he wanted a band to manage, an English band. And he came to hear the new album, and he liked it, and he said, I'd like to see you play live, and they put us in a little club in New Bond Street called Rasputin's at the time. Very, very tiny little place down in a cellar in New Bond Street. And the place was cooking. I mean, it was only small, but we were, even at that time, this was 1968, 69, or 69 it was, the place was really humming, and we were the sort of act, even in those days, that did an audience participation sort of act, and we got half the audience were on stage with us, you know, that was the sort of show we did. And when Chas came down, he walked into this cellar, and he saw this going on, and it was totally the opposite to everything that was going on around at the time in the music business. Most bands, they got long hair and they were playing half-an-hour guitar solos and 10-minute drum solos and all that. And we were totally the opposite to all that was going on. And he flipped, Chas. He thought, whoa, there's something happening here.
Let your head down! Want to see everybody get up off the seat? Clap your hands, stamp your feet! Get down, get with it!
Especially with what I suppose was a cool London audience, you know, a real hip, cool London audience that don't usually get off on that sort of thing from an audience participation bag. And he thought, well, these guys must have something if they can whip up this sort of audience like this in a little club, and they're unknown as well. And he signed us up the next day.
I said, I get down, get with it! I'm doing a job! Come on, baby! I'm gonna watch everybody work! I said, come on, baby! Watch everybody do the dance!
That's really how we met him, and then he began to manage us. He took us from Fontana Records onto Polydor Records, because he had a lot of contacts on Polydor at the time, because through Hendrix and that, working with the people who'd worked with Hendrix. And it was him really that pushed us into writing our own material as well. And once we'd had our first hit, Get Down and Get With It, which was a cover of a Bobby Marchant song that we'd heard by Little Richard. Little Richard had recorded it years ago. It was never a hit record. And it was part of our stage show. It was always our last number in our stage set. And that was our first hit.
Everybody raise both your hands in the air!
Chas said, you must write the next single yourselves. You and Jimmy have got to get together and come up with a 3-minute pop song that could be a hit. And we went round to my mum's house and we wrote "'Cause I Love You" in about 20 minutes. And we played it to Chas on acoustic guitars. And he said, I think you've written your first #1 record. And we thought, oh, get away with it, Chas, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. But we recorded it, we released it, and it was #1 within 2 weeks.
I just like the things you do. Don't you change the things you do.
It gave us amazing confidence, and it gave us amazing confidence in Chas as well, because he'd been right, he'd been proved right. He can spot a hit song. He always could spot a hit song. He could always spot a hit artist as well. He did it with Jimi Hendrix. When as soon as he saw Jimi Hendrix, he knew Hendrix had got something. I mean, Hendrix was playing in a tiny club in New York when he saw him, you know. And he developed Hendrix into... Hendrix wasn't the act he was when Chas saw him, first of all. He brought him to Britain and developed Hendrix into what he became. Although Hendrix had got the initial talent, Chas had to channel it in the right direction. And he did the same with us. He knew we'd got the talent, but it needed channeling in the right direction.
We gotta get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do.
Being in a band himself, you see, he knew what the workings of a band internally were, even though the Animals never got on with one another. They were at one another's throats all the time. But he learnt a lot from that, you know, and they had a strong front man in Eric Burden. When he took Hendrix on, a strong front man again, you know, he knew the importance of doing that, Chas did, you know, and he took his experience, because he was big mates with the Beatles, he was big mates with the Stones. He knew all these people. He'd learnt a lot, even though the Animals didn't last long as a band. He'd learnt a lot by all the business around him and all the people he'd met. He learnt a lot of things, Chas did, and we were lucky. We got the benefit of that experience.
Want to see everybody get your boots up? Everybody, everywhere! I said stamp your feet! Come on and stamp your feet, yeah! Yeah, yeah, yeah! Oh, my! Woo! Everybody stamp your feet! Oh, my!
And once we got that first #1 with our own song, it was plain sailing then. We'd got the confidence and we just churned them out then because we knew we could do it. Because we were always a bit egotistical as a band anyway. We had to be, to show off the way we did on TV and on stage. And as soon as we'd got the bit between our teeth, and we knew we were up and running then, and we knew we could do it. And once you know you can do something, you go at it, you know, 100%, and that's the sort of band we were, and we just churned them out from then on. When we signed with Chas, we'd got a totally different image, but we more or less looked pretty much like every other band that was around at the time. Our act was different to every other band, but we looked pretty much the same. And Chas said, I want people to instantly recognise you. When you go to a gig, I want them to know right away the name of the band and what the band looked like. Because he followed the sort of thing that happened with the Beatles and the Stones and people like that. You knew right away when the Beatle haircut, the Beatle clothes, it was the Beatles. He wanted the same thing for SLADE. And the only thing that sort of hadn't been done at the time, I'm going back to '69 now, the skinhead fashion was very big. It wasn't a political thing in those days, it was a fashion thing. I mean, skinheads really, they were into the Ben Sherman shirts, the short jeans and the bother boots and the braces. And reggae music, reggae and ska. That's what skinheads were all about in the late 60s. Nothing to do with the political aspect of things. And we were playing a lot of ballrooms and clubs around the country where there were skinhead audiences, even though we weren't playing reggae and ska music. But we were playing to a lot of that sort of audience. And Chas said, do you fancy doing that? And we said, no way.
Hey, 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 what you doing to me? Hey, 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 look what you done!
As was his way, Chas, he could talk you into anything. And he said, I think it's right for you. You're that age group, you know, and it will be a look. Anyway, he talked us round and we did it. And I mean, the next day we were in all the papers. You know, he got us so much publicity. It gave us notoriety overnight as well, which was a good thing. The bad thing it did was the media, the television and radio. It set us up it set us up for a fall really, because they didn't really like the image, they didn't like the look of it. We knew that we would never get to a mass market with that look. So when we'd done our first few TV shows and when we'd had the first hit with Get Down and Get With It, we knew then that we'd got to develop the look into something else. And we didn't really change what we were wearing. What we did was made it more colourful. If you notice, for the next record, we still had the shorter trousers. Instead of the bother boots, we had platform boots. We just had colourful short trousers instead of jeans. We had colourful braces, shirts but more colourful, and hats and things like that. And that's what became then into the glam rock era. And but really, we didn't change the look. All we did was made it more colourful. And overnight, it was accepted. Dave was always an eccentric, even before he was famous or successful. He used to walk around Wolverhampton, around the streets of Wolverhampton when he was unknown. Well, he was actually known in Wolverhampton because he was known through the band as the In-Betweens or whatever. But he used to walk around with long cloaks down to the ground and big floppy hats. I mean, he was always a bit eccentric, and you've got to have people like that around, especially in the rock business you have. And as we became more and more successful, his clothes became more and more outrageous. That was his thing, you know. That's all he was cared about, was becoming as over the top as possible.
She's all right, all right, all right, all right. I say you're so young, you're so young. I say you're so young, you're so young.
When we did TV shows, and especially Top of the Pops, he'd always have a new outfit for every new Top of the Pops appearance. But he'd never allow us to see it until it was on in all its glory. We couldn't see him putting it on bit by bit, so he used to go into the toilets to change. And then we'd see it in one fell swoop when he came out. And of course, when he came out in these outfits, we'd all collapse on the floor laughing. I mean, because they were just so over the top, it was untrue. He actually had a saying, Dave did, when we all used to laugh at him when he came out of the changing room and we all saw what he'd gone on. He always had a saying, he used to say, "You write them, I'll sell them." I was nearly as bad. I mean, I wore some daft things as well. But I wasn't as bad as him. But Jimmy and Don to some extent, but certainly Jimmy used to get totally embarrassed because Jimmy was very, very serious. He was the musical one of the band. He was the very, very serious one of the band. And he used to get totally embarrassed by Dave, but Dave didn't care, you know. And that was part of the four different personalities of the band. We were four different personalities, and that was his personality coming out. The big top hat with mirrors that I wore, I made that myself. In fact, I bought the hat was actually an antique. It was an antique coachman's hat. I bought it in Kensington Market in London. And it didn't cost me very much. But the idea I got for the mirrors, I actually saw Lulu doing a TV show. And she got this sparkly dress on. And I saw the light hitting it, and on camera, it was like it was throwing out beams of light. And I thought, now if I could do that, but much bigger beams of light, it's going to be a great effect for on stage. And so I got these mirrors, they're about that big, stuck them all around the hat. And what actually in a live gig, it was a tremendous effect, because you used to black out all the audience and all the stage used to be blacked out. And we just used to hit the top hat at a certain point of the show with a tiny spotlight from the back of the theatre. And beams of light used to come out of the hat like a huge mirror ball, but the beams were massive. And I used to move the hat around the audience, and I could light up the audience with this hat. It was such a precious part of the show and the image that we had to have two made, and in case one got lost on flights around the world, one went with the road crew in the big truck with all the equipment in a flight case, and I carried one with me as personal luggage, so we'd always got a backup if one got lost somewhere around the world. But they travelled around the world, and it was so battered by the end of the time that I did wear it that, you know, it was just falling to bits at the end. I believe that at schools and that, you either like Slade or T-Rex. We had a bit more the rough and ready audience, I think, and T-Rex had a bit more the nicer element, for want of a better word. But I think the music did cross in a certain way. I think people who were T-Rex fans bought our records and vice versa. But there were the stalwarts on both sides, you know, that wouldn't, you know, they were at loggerheads with one another.
I move like a cat, jaws like a rat, sting like a bee, babe, I wanna be your man.
It's just the style of music and the look. I mean, Bowland was a lot more androgynous, effeminate lookers. I mean, we were the football terrace yobbo types and Bowland was the other way. But I think that was more the divide than a north-south divide. But the music did crisscross, and of course, as glam rock gained its momentum, it was all, you know, everybody's fans intermingled. I mean, we did have our hardcore. That's why we had so many #1 records. I mean, we had very, very loyal fans, very loyal, who stuck with us and nobody else. I mean, even today, some of those fans are still there.
It's Christmas! Are you hanging up the stocking on your wall? It's the time that every Santa has a ball. Does he ride a red-nosed reindeer? Does it turn upon his sleigh? Do the fairies keep it so before a day?
The public in general is always going to remember us for Merry Christmas, everybody. I mean, we understand that. I mean, but they do forget that we had a lot of other big hit records as well. But I suppose there's nothing wrong with that. You have to be remembered for one song. Every band's always remembered really for one song. It's the one that'll stick in the people's memory the most. And with us, it's gonna be Merry Christmas.
Are you sure you got the room to spare inside?
It has helped us sustain our career for all those years because it keeps the band's name in people's minds once a year at least, so people still remember Slade once a year, if for nothing else but the Christmas record. The time it does get to me sometimes is, say, when I'm doing my Christmas shopping and I have to go out round the stores, and it's always playing. When you go in a store, you walk in and I mean, I know it gets on other people's nerves. You think what it does to me when I walk in and everybody's looking. I say, that's him, that's his record there. And I get it all the time over Christmas. It's sort of virtually impossible for me to shop at Christmas time. I'm really proud of the record. You know, I think it touched a nerve when it came out in 1973 because it came out in a time, you'd be too young to remember, but there were strikes. TV went off at 10 o'clock at night through power cuts. There was a miners' strike on. Everything was going to pot in the country. You know, the country was on a real downer. And our record was out. And I think it brought a smile on people's faces over that Christmas period. It was sort of that bit of light relief through all the chaos that was going on during that 73 Christmas time.
To the future now, it's only just begun. So here it is, Merry Christmas, everybody's having fun.
Certainly people of my generation remember it in that way as well as being a good fun Christmas party record. They remember it for that because it was like a little beacon above all the chaos that was around at the time. And I still think today, you hear it on radio or you hear it at a party, and it don't really sound dated. It still sounds a good fun party record. And when we wrote it, we knew we'd written a hit record. I mean, there's no way we knew it would still be going 23 years on.
I believe in woman, my oh my. I believe in loving, my oh my. Don't a woman need a man? Try and catch one if you can. I believe in woman, my oh my.
Dave and Don are doing SLADE too at the moment. Yeah, they're doing a lot of work in Europe. And I mean, they wanted to carry on touring. I didn't want to carry on touring anymore. I'd had 25 years on the road altogether. Even more considering I was in a band before I joined with the In-Betweens. And I just didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't mind the actual playing on stage, a couple of hours on stage, but you got to think of all the other hours in the day. And when you've done it for 25 years, you know, you're in airport lounges, you're on aeroplanes, you're in dressing rooms for about 4 hours of the day, you're in hotel rooms. There's not much to do. You do get thoroughly bored. I felt I was getting stale with it. It worked out that we were doing an album, straight out on the road to promote it, and then you go into the next album, it was year in, year out, that was the merry-go-round. And I felt there was a world outside of that, and I wanted to discover the world outside. I didn't just want to be locked in the circus of our tour with the band and the roadies, and that's all I knew as my main life, year in, year out. You know? And after 20 odd years doing that, I wanted to discover whatever else was out there, and I couldn't begrudge Dave and Don wanting to carry on touring, but I didn't want to do it anymore. It would be a lot of work to get back into the swing of doing it again. We'd have to, you know, tour a lot to get back up to the standard that we were, because I certainly wouldn't settle for anything less. I wouldn't go out and do a half-baked tour or a half-baked shows. It would have to be as good as I always remember it was. There's no way I'd do it on a half-cock at all. There is just no way I'd do it. But I can never say never, but I doubt it. I very much doubt it.